سلام و برنامه امشب پل خوش آمدید.
Tonight, with Afghanistan and Pakistan at the forefront of major policy decisions in the Obama administration and the United States Congress, I'll talk with three leading U.S. policymakers. Later in the program, I'll be joined by two members of the House of Representatives.
قانونگذاران برجسته کانگرس ایالات متحده در آغاز برنامه یک تن از جمهوری خواهان از ایالات میزوری محترم کریستوفر باند که به سمت معاون رئیس کمیته انتخاب بخش استخبارات.
But we begin with Missouri Republican Christopher Bond, Vice Chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and a member of the Appropriations Committee. Senator Bond is also a co-sponsor of legislation that would create economic opportunity zones in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Welcome, Senator Bond.
Senator Bond, خوش آمدین.
Mariam, pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
There's been billions of dollars appropriated for Afghanistan since 9/11, but many Afghans would say that that assistance is not reaching them, and there's reports that only 10% actually spent for development, and the rest is military. How do you think that can be improved?
Well, that's one of the key things we have to do. We turned over the role for assuring peace and security in Afghanistan to allies from other countries who did not pursue the job adequately. So we now have more Americans there helping develop the Afghan military and the Afghan police. But the most important thing we need to do, number one, is listen to the people of Afghanistan. My people saw a road that had been built by next to one village, and the road was blown up by the Taliban, and the people who were working on the road were shot at and some were killed. When we talked with the local Jirga leaders, they said, we don't want a road, we need clean water. So our first emphasis is to work with the people on the ground to find out what they need.
One of the areas of many Afghans of concern is the civilian casualties from the airstrikes. General Stanley McChrystal, who was recently appointed, said that the airstrikes in Afghanistan contain the seeds of our own destruction if we do not use it reasonably. Senator Bond, do you expect the change in military command in Afghanistan to have an impact on the civilian casualties?
We must reduce civilian casualties, and that's why it's very important for us to work through and with the Afghan military, because they know who the good people are, they know who the innocent civilians are, and they can help identify the Taliban or the drug lords who want to exercise their control and take control away from the people of Afghanistan. So that is a critical first step.
But do you think that this will go to less use of air power, which is what many Afghans are still complaining about?
We should use air power only when we see that there is a need, where there is a concentrated group of Taliban, Al-Qaeda, or the Haqqani group, or others who will come into Afghanistan. We must work together with the forces in Pakistan to make sure that the terrorists who hide out in the Fatah, northwest provinces, and elsewhere do not come into Afghanistan. And that's been one of the biggest problems. I've been to the outposts on the Afghan-Pakistan border, and I know firsthand how dangerous it is to the Afghan people and the Afghan communities.
I want to turn to the topic of, governance. There's been reports, that corruption has increased in Afghanistan in the last 2 years. Do you think that the current administration in Afghanistan is doing enough to address corruption?
We want to help them deal with corruption. Number one, there has to be adequate pay for the police and others to make sure that they don't work for the drug lords or the terrorist groups to assist them. And that's one of the things that's very important, because it is not just military. It's far more important that we give Afghan farmers the opportunity to earn a better living by improving their agriculture, and I've been very active in that.
But Senator Bond, some Afghans would say that the U.S. should be placing more pressure on the current administration to take more action against corruption.
We have,
do you think enough is being done?
I have a report from one of my associates who has spent the last year in Afghanistan, and he tells me that we're making good progress and we're going after those people who are corrupt, who want to turn it over to the insurgent groups or the drug lords who control the poppy production.
As we know, elections are coming up in Afghanistan, and the Obama administration has been more critical of the Karzai administration and said, you know, it's not going to be the same relationship as it was with President Bush. Do you think that this change in relationship will benefit the United States?
Well, the important thing is what will benefit Afghanistan. We look forward to the people of Afghanistan working their will at the polls, and we work with the elected leaders of Afghanistan and other countries. We want to strengthen that government, make sure it is able to secure peace and stability, recognize human rights, and protect the people. We also want to work with them to make sure that development projects are projects that are wanted in each local community. And that's why we are putting renewed emphasis on dealing with the local jirgas and other leadership groups in each community to find out, what do you need? What can we do to help you improve your lives?
And you talked about agriculture, and I know you have been very active, and you got your Missouri, the National Guard there to go to Afghanistan and help with agricultural training programs. You know, can you tell us about that initiative and why it's important for counter-narcotics efforts?
When I met with President Karzai in January of 2006, he said, we need agricultural experts to come and help us improve the agriculture. So for 2 years, I secured money for the State Department to send agricultural experts over. They weren't able to do that. So in the summer of 2007, some leaders of our National Guard, who happen to be farmers, they are citizen soldiers, and they work full-time at farming, but they went over and they said, we can help. So in January of 2008, we sent an agricultural development team to Nangarhar province, and I visited the second group when I was there this past December, and we found they had had tremendous progress. As a matter of fact, when I met with President Karzai and representatives of his government, we talked for a long time about the problems, but when I asked him about Nangarhar province, he and everybody smiled and said, that is a success. They're producing higher quality broccoli and asparagus for the city markets. They've done many other things that I think will continue to assure that the people of Nangarhar have a better agriculture that's more profitable. We provide refrigeration so they can keep the products they use there, a canning facility so they can can the fruits and vegetables. And I always order, I always buy pomegranate juice when I go to the grocery store to help encourage the market for the delicious pomegranate juice that's produced in Afghanistan.
Well, Senator Bond, I want to thank you for your time, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
When we return, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives who introduced key legislation to create Reconstruction Opportunity Zones in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
با شما معرفی خواهم کرد. در این اواخر شورای ایالات متحده آمریکا
Welcome back. The U.S. House of Representatives recently passed key legislation allowing certain exports from designated Reconstruction and Opportunity Zones in the border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan to enter the U.S. without being taxed. Joining me now is one of the congressmen who introduced the legislation, Maryland Democrat Chris van Hollen.
محترم Chris van Hollen، یک تن از دموکراتان ایالات مریلند. Congressman Van Hollen, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
You were actually born in Karachi, Pakistan, where your father was posted as a Foreign Service officer, and you also lived in Turkey, Sri Lanka, and India.
Yes.
Do you have memories of growing up there, and what were your parents' impression of the region?
Well, you're right. I lived many of my earlier years in South Asia, went through the Khyber Pass at a very early age. I don't have really strong memories of Pakistan except through the pictures because we left there at a very young age, but I do have very vivid recollections of the region as a whole. I spent a lot of time in India, where I went to high school in Tamil Nadu, which is in southern India. But I've had the opportunity to go back to Pakistan and visit Pakistan as a member of Congress, and it's always good to see many of the people who actually knew my parents from the period of time that they were there back in the late 1950s, early 1960s.
So, with that background and knowledge of Afghanistan and maybe the region, there's been this new strategy that the Obama administration unveiled in April. What do you think of this new strategy?
Well, I think it's a very important new strategy because it recognizes that military power alone cannot bring about the results that we want to see in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. That doesn't by itself bring stability, that you need to have a strong economic component. And so for the country to get back on its feet, it's important that we provide whatever support we need so the Afghan people can rebuild their country.
Congressman, though, some people would say we hear that, but then when the actual dollars are being appropriated, it's still largely for military spending. What about the Afghans? What about what their needs are? How would you address that concern?
Well, President Obama's new strategy is to ensure that the civilians that are going to Afghanistan now as part of the U.S. Effort are there really to provide whatever training and internal capacity building they can, because it doesn't do any good for Americans to go to Afghanistan and do the work as Americans. Obviously, what you want to do is build up and strengthen the capacity of the Afghan people to get the economy going again, to develop the structures of civil society. So you're right that it would be a big mistake if we were just to go in and use American contractors and Americans to try and rebuild Afghanistan. That is the work of the Afghani people. All they need is a little bit of help and some of the resources that we can provide to do the job.
You're a Democrat, and since 2006, the Democrats have had control of Congress. Do you see any differences with respect to the Democratic and Republicans' approach to U.S. policy for Afghanistan?
Well, I do. Under the Democrats and under President Obama, there has been a much greater focus on Afghanistan. We believe that a lot of the resources and the attention was diverted to Iraq, when indeed, of course, the attacks of September 11, 2001 came from al-Qaeda having a safe haven within Afghanistan because of the Taliban government. So we believe it's long overdue that we provide additional resources to help provide stability in Afghanistan. And a key component of that is this economic assistance, both on the Pakistani side of the border as well as the Afghan side of the border.
And with respect to that assistance, you were one of the co-sponsors of legislation, the Reconstruction Opportunity Zones,
yes,
that would provide an additional layer of assistance. Can you say something about the legislation and how you think it may build cooperation in the region?
Yes, this legislation I introduced would allow the president to designate certain areas within Afghanistan and Pakistan as what we call Reconstruction Opportunity Zones. And businesses that produce goods from those regions would ensure that those goods would get duty-free access to U.S. markets. So there would be no tariff on those goods, which obviously makes those goods more competitive within the U.S. market. So it's a way to spur economic development within Afghanistan and within parts of Pakistan so that you have more businesses, more entrepreneurs.
But there's still the infrastructure issues to actually get these businesses running. Do you see Congress having the will to continue providing assistance to those infrastructure issues so that Afghanistan can get back on its feet, and the northwest frontier of Pakistan as well?
Yes, the United States, working with international organizations and some of our partners around the world, is focused also on the infrastructure projects. As you say, you need energy projects, you need water projects. I mean, you need to have the basic infrastructure to help the country grow and prosper. And so we're committed to doing that. The World Bank is also focused on a number of projects in Afghanistan, and in Pakistan we're working with the IMF to provide additional funding so the government there can build greater capacity.
And we're talking about, regional cooperation through economic means, but what other roles do you think the U.S. can play with respect to bringing about greater cooperation with respect to security, especially, between Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Well, I think the invitation that the President Obama extended to President Karzai and President Zardari that brought them here to the United States for the trilateral discussions was a great first step. It was a signal that President Obama is very engaged in trying to improve cooperation between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Of course, under General Musharraf, when he was the leader of Pakistan, there were very tense relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. With the newly elected civilian government in Pakistan, things have dramatically improved. President Karzai and President Zardari have a very close relationship, and the United States is very involved in trying to make sure that the lines of communication there, both in terms of security issues as well as other issues, remain open.
Congressman, I want to end with going back to the time of Charlie Wilson. We had a chance to interview him for this show, and he had said that, he had gone to Congress and asked for funding for schools and reconstruction after the Soviet withdrawal. Of course, we know that didn't happen, and we saw the results. Do you think that Congress will continue to support Afghanistan even after the troops withdraw?
It has to, because we need to learn the lessons of history, and it was a huge mistake for the United States to disengage from Afghanistan, to disengage from Pakistan, simply because the Soviets withdrew, because that disengagement helped sow the seeds for the disintegration of the infrastructure of the country and created instability in the country. So certainly as one member of Congress, I look forward to making a sustained commitment to help build Afghanistan, to support the people of Pakistan and Afghanistan. This is not just a short-term relationship.
Well, Congressman, I want to thank you for your time and coming to our show and sharing your views with our viewers about U.S. assistance for Afghanistan.
Thank you.
When we come back, a leading member of the U.S. House of Representatives who has been heavily involved with Afghanistan since the 1980s.
Ed Royce, یک تن از جمهوری خواهان کالیفرنیا.
California Republican Ed Royce serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and is a ranking member of its Subcommittee on Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade. A member of the Subcommittee on the Middle East and South Asia, Congressman Royce also authored the Radio Free Afghanistan Act of 2001.
Congressman, in a recent address to Congress, Lieutenant General McChrystal said, he defined success as the measure of effectiveness will not be the number of enemy killed, it will be the number of Afghans shielded from violence. Do you think that his new strategy will actually help to reduce civilian casualties and then thereby reducing the support for the Taliban?
I think it will. I think General McChrystal's strategy is the right strategy. I think that one of the great difficulties that has occurred is because the ISI still supports in Pakistan, because elements of the government, some of us feel, are still supporting the Taliban and giving them the resources to move across the border. This has created an enormous problem in terms of removing those units that operate in about 10% of Afghanistan, and that is where the casualties occur when U.S. units and other NATO units come into contact with Taliban forces.
However, the House has also approved a marked increase in U.S. funding for Pakistan. You've been a strong supporter of imposing some tough conditions, saying there will be no blank checks. What do you mean by that?
Well, that to me is one of the key issues. We have spent about $40 billion in Afghanistan since the removal of the Taliban. We've spent about $12 billion, I believe, in Pakistan. But a lot of that money that was spent, there wasn't sufficient oversight in terms of how the government was spending it. And the concern that some of us have is that even though we're getting cooperation from the new government in Pakistan, there are still elements in the government, in the intelligence services, that we are not convinced are being helpful. At the same time, it is true that the Pakistani government and military is now confronting the rebellion, the insurgents that are in the Swat Valley. So we want to be helpful in terms of trying to bring some measure of stability and security inside Pakistan. But at the same time, we need to tie that to conditions.
With respect to corruption, if the U.S. is going to be putting more money into Afghanistan, what is the U.S. Congress doing in terms of monitoring its own funds that its contractors are spending, as well as corruption within the Afghan government?
Well, that is one of the things that we have been discussing, is putting additional auditors in, engaging in ways that create more transparency. One of the things that I've tried to do is to provide support for programming, which Afghans themselves will do, which will give more information to people so that they're better informed, and hopefully they can help become part of the process of creating the impetus or the support for the reforms in society.
You've been an advocate of women's rights in Afghanistan for a number of years. And I want to ask, have you seen a marked improvement in women's rights? And also, what areas do you think still need to be improved? And is Congress doing anything to continue to address the needs of women in Afghanistan?
I think that's a very important question. First, infant mortality, death at childbirth. That situation has improved markedly. In terms of education opportunity for example, young women, the percentage is getting close to 40% of the student body being female students. In terms of university, I remember seeing a number recently that 35% of the undergraduate students in the universities are women who are pursuing careers often in teaching or in medicine. So we can see the progress.
Recently, President Karzai had signed a law that would limit women's rights. It would limit their right to inheritance, to education, as well as it legalized marital rape. And this would only apply to Shiite women, but it was a step back from the progress that women had made in Afghanistan. During President Karzai's visit to Washington, was this an issue that was raised by members of Congress?
Yes, I think I think that's one of the reasons why it's in abeyance, probably, is because not just in the United States raising it here, but I think internationally among women around the world, it became an issue. It became an issue, and I think as a result there was probably a second look, and then women in Afghanistan, of course, also spoke out, and as a consequence of that, that brought some measure of change.
So there's continued support for women in Afghanistan from the Hill.
There is absolute support, and by the way, here, that support came from both Republicans and Democrats.
Thank you, Congressman Royce, for your time, for coming and sharing with our viewers what some of the initiatives are that you've been involved with respect to Afghanistan.
Mariam, thank you very much.
Thank you. با تشکر از Congressman Ed Royce, Senator Christopher Bond, و Congressman Chris van Hollen.
My thanks also to Senator Christopher Bond and Congressman Chris van Hollen. We'd love to hear what you think about this or any other poll program. Just go online to americaabroad.org or visit us at tolo.tv. See you next week for another edition of Poll.
دیدار شما دوستان با برنامه بعدی پل. شب خوش و خداحافظ شما عزیزان.